Okay. Thank you so much to everyone for those four very different but very important elements of human and humane care. I know that this will generate a huge amount of discussion, and we've tried to look at this from various angles, and the questions that have come in have demonstrated that. So, one of the things that is very obvious, Jana, is that there's a lot of learning to do about birth fear and tocophobia. And the first question I've got is, can you tell us what you know is the difference between those?
Thank you, Kathryn, and just sound delighted to be here, and what a fabulous question. The difference is tocophobia requires, it's a medical condition, it's a recognised condition. So I like to think of a fear of birth as a spectrum. So down here we have anxiety and we have fears. So the majority of women will be fearful and be anxious around birth, and that's including primogravidas and multips. Tocophobics, women that have tocophobia, you'll be very unlikely to meet a woman with tocophobia. These women choose to have terminations. They are desperate to have a baby. And I know, Kathryn, in your clinical practice, we've seen, I've seen 3 women in my career. These are women that are desperate to have a baby that have had terminations because they can't go through the pregnancy. So I'm just mindful that as midwives, we use that term too lightly to say that woman's tocophobic. I'm tocophobic. And every day I meet women that say, I've got tocophobia. And when we start to unpack it, they have fear and anxiety, which can be supported once we find out the reasons. It could be pain that they're fearful of. It could be the birth itself. Stitches is a common one. I don't want to tear, but we can support women in that journey. So women with tocophobia really need to be referred to a psychologist, psychiatrist even, and certainly, when we get her, pregnant and in that journey with an obstetrician, they need absolute, very powerful support. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Question for Ali, and this is directed really around the gap that is seen to occur between our two professions. Although, as you say, we're moving much more into one lane of the motorway. So the question that I have in front of me is, how can we allay fears of obstetricians? And this is referring into India, where midwifery is probably not so consolidated as a profession. What advice would you give your colleagues over in India to allay their fears around what they currently work in and what they may work with?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you, Kathryn, whoever answered it. So the most important thing is to speak with the obstetricians there. So I have spoken, being now an honorary fellow of FOGSI, which is the Federation of Indian Obstetricians and Gynecologists, as of course are Avita and the gang in India at the Fernandez Hospital. So I think having some chats behind the scenes with obstetricians is really important. So really to try and find out what the reasons are, what the barriers are, and I certainly know that there are some that can be worked on. And then really give a public message, a very strong public message of one voice. But that is really happening in India, as in everywhere in the world, and probably at a greater pace in India, because I think the FOGSI and the Indian midwives have really got together. So I say, I think it's a combination of some conversations behind the scenes to really genuinely have some honest dialogue and explore what the barriers are. And often we're finding that those can just be taken away quite easily. So I think it's a really exciting time.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And one of the things that you mentioned in your talk, Ali, was something that I've done for many years as part of my clinical practice, was every morning on delivery suite, we have a multidisciplinary discussion around what cases went to theatre last night. And I'm really pleased to see that the way you explained it was including midwives, including anaesthetists, and so on. It's the only way we can break barriers down is by those kind of events. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Respecting each other's roles and responsibilities, but absolutely looking at what we can do together. But, you know, there are still some barriers, and we need to really try and explore what those are to properly break them down. But I definitely think we're getting there. And this conference is really testament to that.
Thank you. Bunty, I'm going to bring you in now to talk to me a little bit around language. And I know that you talked a little bit about inclusive language. Can you give us some kind of direct references about what you mean in caring for same-sex couples and how that would impact on care?
Hi, Kathryn. Yes. So I think I know I talked a little bit about making incorrect assumptions, and I think that's really important when you're looking at inclusive language in maternity. So it's simple things such as if you're looking after somebody who is non-binary or trans, actually asking them what their pronouns are, what their preferred pronouns are to be used. A way around misgendering people is to just use people's names as opposed to actually calling them, you know, the woman or she or the mother, and actually just asking people what they prefer. I think a common one is mistaking same-sex couples for sisters or friends. You know, actually recognizing that in maternity or just generally in society that we do make a lot of incorrect assumptions based on what seems normal to us in society, and being very mindful of that in a maternity setting so that you are going to have increasing numbers of same-sex couples.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And I also think that I think Susan touched on this in her talk around fear, and that fear being generated in health professionals. It certainly was something that I saw in my research when I was doing my PhD, that women, yes, are fearful. We understand a lot more about that. But what we don't understand about is fear in ourselves and working in situations that expose us and expose our vulnerabilities. I'm going to put this out to all three of you. If you'd like to just take what you think I'm referring to there and give us your opinion on that. Bunty, do you want to respond?
So with regards to fear, did you say?
Yeah, fear of health professionals, midwives, obstetricians.
I think from a perspective of caring for same-sex couples, I think that, and I did talk about it during my talk about people having to come out all the time. And I think that's quite a big one for same-sex couples, that fear of having to come out to every midwife and obstetrician that you meet, and then that fear of judgment and how that then impacts on your care, and that fear of people's bias and that kind of underlying wave of homophobia, which then impacts the care that they get. And I do think that if you look at the statistics from reports published by people like Stonewall, you will see that people are not accessing care because they are so scared of the judgment that they will meet, or that the poor care that they may receive because of the judgment, that it's still an enormous problem which we're not tackling fully. And definitely needs to be addressed either through, more research and actually looking how it impacts maternity care specifically.
Thank you. Thanks. Ali, would you like to give us your take on fearful obstetricians of midwives?
Yeah. I think there's fear going on all levels, aren't there? As our speakers have brought out, and from I think that we have no idea often of the fear of the women of us. You know, we like to think we're quite approachable, but of course we're not as much as we think. So we need to really keep checking out, as Bunty says, keep checking out what the woman or the birthing person wants to be referred to as. And I suppose also just to acknowledge the fear of some obstetricians and midwives, because we may be ignorant of certain situations and we may be fearful of saying the wrong thing. So I think sometimes people then shy away from saying anything, which is really unhelpful. So I think we just need to keep learning and keep listening to people like Bunty to let us know the experiences.
Yeah, thank you. Jana?
I think that for me, it's really any woman, and if I was speaking to a student midwife, I would say to them, to reduce fear and anxiety for women, believe them. If a woman tells you she's scared, she's fearful, believe her. Mm-hmm. And let her tell her story. Mm-hmm. And that goes for the same-sex couple, for anybody. So it's around listening. You know, my mum used to say, you've got one of these and two of these, mm-hmm. and you should use it in that proportion. Yeah. Because I think that quite often we see in consultations, people jumping in. Let the woman talk, okay? Mm-hmm. Because actually that makes a huge difference. And the other thing is stereotyping, you know? So when you see somebody, she may look middle class, she may look like she's got everything, but actually stop putting people in boxes. Mm-hmm. So there's two things for me, and that's the advice I would give. Yeah. The other thing I would like to think about is using the AAAQ. So remember, when we develop and look at services, they're to be acceptable, available, accessible, and be of good quality. So if we do that, them things, I believe we're going to make a huge difference to the lives of all women and to us too.
I think this has just scratched the surface of fear being such a huge issue. I mean, we're all human. We're all subject to, as I said, vulnerabilities. And one of my colleagues, it's a very quick story that I'll share with you now. We had a woman visit our clinic who wanted to give birth to her twin babies in the birth centre. She wasn't a primate. She was having perfectly healthy twins. And you can imagine, you know, way back in 2010, that was, I think, the year we opened our alongside birth centre. So the woman was very well read, very informed, understood, and basically wanted midwifery care. That's what she wanted, but she wanted it in a place that would support her needs. And anyway, to cut a long story short, we had a great plan. This woman went into her labour at night time, as you do. She came into our birth centre with her 3-year-old asleep with a hubby and the dog. The dog went in the garden of the birth centre. And this woman gave birth to her first twin very quickly. The obstetrician who was on call overnight was informed and came rushing in, but I was there first. The obstetrician went to labour ward. I was in the birth centre. And this woman gave birth to her second baby in a breech position beautifully. And I can remember walking down to labour ward to give them the news all was well. And the obstetrician was in tears and it was obviously very emotional. And I put my arms around her and I said, it's okay. We've done this safely and we've done this the way the woman wanted. So I acknowledged her fears. She was very fearful for us. And, you know, we take that on. And I think what this kind of conversation opens up is we are none of us without fear, none of us without bringing that into our workplace. One of the things, Alison, I just want to raise this as an issue is where there is bullying. And I know the RCOG, and I've worked as an undermining champion in the UK, realise that this was a big issue. I wonder if you want to take a minute or two to talk about what bullying has done and how it's been tackled from the UK perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Kathryn. I think it's a really important point. And as you say, the RCOG and the RCM have done a lot of work collectively on this. Very sadly, we are seeing high rates of bullying in maternity services in the UK. And there's lots of reasons why that might be. But I think really importantly is that we give a very clear message that bullying is not acceptable. We're doing as much as we can to flatten the hierarchy in terms of, consultants to junior doctors and senior midwives to junior midwives. And there's a lot of work I think we can do on that in terms of respecting everybody. But also, really importantly, we need to think about how this is impacting on the women. And if we think about a bullying environment where it's sometimes seen as acceptable for one member of staff to be bullying another, how is that then going to manifest itself in all of us in the care that we're giving to our women? So whether the women see that or whether they witness it or whether they feel it, when a woman is feeling particularly vulnerable and fearful herself, then I think that's really unacceptable. So we have to tackle it. We have to give very clear messages, but people need tools as well. So we're doing a lot of work in terms of how to start the conversations, because we all know that's sometimes quite difficult to take someone aside and say, sorry, that behaviour wasn't acceptable. But we're trying to role model that in nipping it in the bud straight away and make sure that everybody realises that it's a zero tolerance to a bullying environment.
Yeah. And on the RCOG website, it does host a whole range of tools and videos and scenarios. And I would just point people in that direction because there's an awful lot of work gone into that. I've got a question for Bunty now, and it's around gender and maternity care. Bunty, in India, the research in this area is unusual, and of course it's very sensitive no matter where you are in the world. Can you suggest how research can be approached in this area? And did you face any challenges in your kind of understanding and publications?
I think the most important thing, if you are considering areas of research with regards to gender and non-binary people in maternity, is to actually ask the community and understand that your role as a privileged person, so a cisgendered person, somebody who identifies as the gender they are born with, that you understand that you make space for people to have a voice. And I think if you're going to do research, it very much needs to be around how people feel about their maternity care in order to make improvements.
Thank you. Thanks. I think it's difficult, isn't it, when you're kind of stretching out into an area that you're not comfortable with or confident with. To me, the most obvious place to go is to the people who know best. And as any decent researcher will tell you, that, from a feminist perspective, non-hierarchical, qualitative research that brings people in their own right, but in an equal rights way, is the only way forward.
Definitely. And I do think that we would benefit, speaking from a sort of UK perspective, of having some good national guidance on what trusts are expected to provide for people in the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah, I think that's work for the future, don't you?
Definitely.
Jana, before we wind down, we don't have much longer for our discussion. one of the, a couple of questions really. It says, are there any other fear of birth consultation clinics mainstreamed across the NHS? And also, are you aware of other treatments for fear of birth, such as pregnancy yoga or hypnobirthing?
Yeah. I'm off mute, sorry. So that's a really interesting and an excellent question, whoever gave that. And I think that in the UK at the moment, there is a concerted effort, and certainly COVID has brought that to light around anxieties for women. So I think the spotlight on fear and anxiety is certainly now becoming more mainstream, as women have started to feel that they're able to have a voice. And social media is always a double-edged sword. But actually with fear and anxiety, it's been pretty fantastic, because women can then contact each other and contact and reach out to physicians. And I'm sure, I have women email me daily. Can they have a consultation? So your question is, they're not really mainstreamed, and I'm sure that Ali will probably say the same. Women contact her, they've got fears and anxieties. What can we do? I'm very fortunate. I've worked with fantastic obstetricians, and we support women without stereotyping and thinking about what do they want. I think that hypnobirthing and acupuncture are fantastic for women. It's what suits that woman, depending on what her fear is. Again, they're not mainstreamed. And it links to that inequalities, that those women that have funds can afford it.
Yeah.
And I think this is where we need to look at that evidence around what works. So my research and the clinic that Rosha helped me with was really looking at a screening tool. Why are women fearful? What are the anxieties? And you bespoke your antenatal consultation to focus on that fear and that anxiety.
Yes.
So I think that, and if acupuncture, aromatherapy, works, that's fabulous. The most effective tool we have as midwives is continuity of carer.
Yeah.
That woman needs to know, and that includes the obstetrician too. It's a team.
Yeah.
They need to know which doctor they're going to, be part of their team. So we're multidisciplinary. I hope that answers the question, Kathryn.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I'm going to just give you a few thoughts as we wind up to the end of this conference. I think you laid out very clearly, Jana, the issues of tocophobia, but more importantly, probably fear of birth. And you shared with us all the intricacies of identifying these women and providing them with care within mainstream services. I think, Ali, you showed how working together for one purpose is the best way and the safest way forward, and a way that gives women and their families the real kind of leap of faith in their journey of becoming a mother and a father, that we know they take, and they're not alone, and we are with them. I think Susan's presentation and her language and her thoughts around the sensitivity of being with women at such an incredible but also life-changing moment really laid out for us how we have to pay that just as much attention as we do all the other practical and urgent things that we take for granted. And I think the spiritual aspect of maternity care is under-resourced and under-spoken about. And then finally, Bunty, bringing to us how the needs of all people are met within maternity care, and the language used and the assumptions and the fear around how caring for someone who might be different. We are all different, every single one of us. And I think care that is continuous with the same people is the only way forward, so that we have meaningful relationships. Thank you all, and fantastic to see you all here. Lovely to see your faces on the screen, but not in person. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.